Story number 1. Stranger in the Snow. Winter in Iceland is a season that strips the world down to its barest elements. The relentless snow transforms the rugged landscape into an endless expanse of white, where visibility drops to mere feet, and the wind howls like a chorus of restless spirits. In 2016, I found myself living alone in a remote cabin on the outskirts of Reykjavik, miles away from the nearest town. The isolation was both a refuge and a curse, offering peace but also amplifying the silence to an almost deafening level. I had moved to Iceland seeking solitude and inspiration for my writing. The cabin, with its sturdy wooden walls and panoramic views of the snow-covered wilderness, seemed perfect. My days were spent hiking through the pristine forests, capturing the ethereal beauty of the landscape, and my nights were filled with the comforting crackle of the fireplace and the soft glow of lamplight filtering through the windows. The first few months were idyllic. The snowflakes danced in the crisp air, and the northern lights painted the night sky with vibrant hues of green and purple. But as winter deepened, an unsettling feeling began to creep into my peaceful existence. Started subtly a sense of being watched, fleeting shadows darting just beyond the edge of my vision, and the occasional whisper of footsteps echoing through the silent woods. One particularly frigid night in December, the storm hit with unprecedented fury. The wind howled mercilessly, battering the cabin with icy gusts that rattled the windows and threatened to tear the roof off. I was nestled in my favorite armchair, typing away on my laptop, when I heard a distinct, heavy thud coming from the parking lot outside. Heart pounding, I set aside my work and approached the window cautiously. The storm obscured everything, the thick snowflakes swirling in a chaotic dance, blurring the boundary between sky and earth. Through the dim light of the cabin, I spotted something that made my blood run cold. A series of large, deep footprints leading from the parking lot and disappearing into the dense forest beyond. I rubbed my eyes, convincing myself it was just an animal struggling against the storm. But then, I noticed something even more disturbing. The footprints were human, unmistakably so, yet they were far too large to belong to any person I knew or any ordinary human being. My mind raced with possibilities. Had someone been stalking me? Or was this something far more sinister? Determined to get to the bottom of the mystery, I grabbed my flashlight and ventured outside into the storm. The cold was biting, each step through the snow a battle against the wind that seemed intent on pushing me back. The footprints led deeper into the forest, their path illuminated only by the faint beam of my flashlight. As I followed them, the singing of the wind transformed into an eerie, almost melodic hum, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. After what felt like hours, the footprints led me to a clearing I had never noticed before. In the center stood a towering figure, its form obscured by the swirling snow, yet unmistakably human. The figure remained motionless, staring directly at me with eyes that glowed an unnatural red, piercing through the darkness like embers in a dying fire. My breath caught in my throat as I took a step closer, the realization dawning on me that this was no ordinary visitor. "Who are you?" I called out, my voice trembling with a mixture of fear and curiosity. The figure did not respond. Instead, it began to move toward me, each step deliberate and menacing. I turned to flee, but my legs felt like lead, rooted to the spot by an invisible force. The figure loomed closer, his presence oppressive, the air around us thick with an unspoken tension. Just as the figure reached out a hand toward me, the storm intensified, the wind howling louder than ever, drowning out all other sounds. In a desperate attempt to break free, I swung my flashlight at the figure, the beam cutting through the darkness and momentarily illuminating its grotesque features. It recoiled, the redness in its eyes dimming, and then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure vanished into thin air, leaving behind only the lingering chill and the fading echo of its presence. Shaken and disoriented, I stumbled back to the cabin, the footprints now fading into the distance as if they had never been there. The storm showed no signs of abating, the snow piling higher against the windows and the wind refusing to relent. I locked all the doors and windows, trying to convince myself that it had all been a figment of my imagination, a hallucination brought on by the relentless isolation and the harsh winter. But the memory of those glowing red eyes and the towering figure remained etched in my mind, a haunting reminder that I was not alone in that vast, frozen wilderness. The next morning, the storm had finally subsided, leaving behind a serene but eerie stillness. Determined to find some answers, I ventured back to the clearing, hoping to uncover any clues that might explain the night's terrifying events. But there was nothing, no footprints, no signs of the figure, just the untouched snow and the silent forest that stretched out before me. Frustrated and unnerved, I returned to the cabin, the weight of the night's experience pressing heavily on my shoulders. I decided to delve into the local history, seeking any mention of strange occurrences or legends that might shed light on what I had witnessed. Hours of research led me to a forgotten tale of a man named Erik Bjornsson, a solitary figure who had lived in the area decades earlier. Erik was known for his reclusive nature and his obsession with the mystical properties of the forest. According to old newspaper clippings, Erik had disappeared one winter night, leaving behind his cabin and a trail of large footprints that led deep into the forest. No one had ever found him, and over the years, the story faded into local folklore, a ghost story told around campfires to scare away curious wanderers. Realizing that I might have encountered the spirit of Erik Bjornsson, I felt a mixture of fear and compassion. Perhaps his restless spirit was seeking closure, trapped in an endless loop of searching for something he could never find. Determined to help, I decided to return to the clearing one last time, hoping to communicate with the apparition and bring peace to the troubled soul. That night, armed with candles, old photographs of Erik, and a sense of purpose, I ventured out into the forest once more. The storm had returned, fiercer than before, but I pressed on, guided by a deep-seated need to resolve the mystery. Reaching the clearing, I set up a small altar, placing the candles and photographs carefully in the center. "Erik," I called out softly, "I know you're here. I want to help you find peace." The wind seemed to respond, swirling around me with an almost sentient intent. The air grew colder, and the shadows danced menacingly as I stood before the altar, waiting for a sign. Suddenly, the figure of Erik materialized before me, his eyes still glowing with that haunting red light. But this time, there was a different expression, one of sorrow and longing. "Why can't you move on?" I asked, my voice breaking through the silence. Erik's form wavered, the anger in his eyes giving way to a deep, unspoken sadness. He reached out a hand, pointing toward the forest, as if indicating that his search had never ended. I felt a connection, a shared understanding of loneliness and the desperate need for resolution. "Tales," I began, recalling the old stories. "They say your footprints led deep into the forest, but no one ever found you. Maybe if someone remembers your story, you can finally find peace." Erik nodded slowly, the red glow in his eyes dimming to a soft, ethereal light. The atmosphere around us shifted, the oppressive tension lifting as if a weight had been removed. "Remember me," he whispered, his voice now a mere echo carried by the wind. "Don't let me fade into the silence." With those final words, Erik's apparition began to fade, his form dissolving into the night sky. The candles flickered gently, the forest around me returning to its tranquil stillness. I felt a sense of fulfillment wash over me, knowing that I had helped a lost soul find the closure it so desperately sought. As dawn broke, the snow glistened under the soft morning light, the forest peaceful once more. The footprints had vanished, leaving no trace of their existence, and the cabin stood silent, a testament to the night's extraordinary events. In the years that followed, I often returned to that remote cabin, not out of fear but out of respect for the memories and the stories that lingered in the snow. The encounter with Erik Bjornsson became a pivotal moment in my life, a reminder of the thin veil that separates our world from the unknown and the importance of compassion in the face of the supernatural. If you ever find yourself alone in the vast, frozen wilderness, and you hear the faint echoes of a restless spirit's song carried by the wind, remember my story. Sometimes, the spirits that wander are not there to haunt but to seek understanding and peace. Honor their presence, listen to their stories, and you may just help a lost soul find the closure it has long been denied. Because in the heart of the storm, beneath the blanket of snow, the whispers of the past can reach out to touch the present, reminding us all that some stories never truly end. They simply wait to be heard. Story number 2. Song amidst the snowfield. Winter in rural Russia is a time of unparalleled beauty and relentless isolation. The vast expanse of snow-covered fields stretches endlessly under a pale, gray sky, each flake falling silently to blanket the world in white. In January 1995, I found myself alone in our family farmhouse, nestled deep within these frozen plains. My wife had moved to the city for work, leaving me to tend to the land and maintain the old house that had been in our family for generations. The solitude was both a blessing and a curse. The peacefulness of the snowy landscape offered a reprieve from the chaos of everyday life, but the isolation also bred a lingering unease that settled in the corners of my mind. I often found myself gazing out the large windows, lost in thought, as the wind whispered through the bare trees and the snow piled higher against the walls. It was the first week of January when it began. Late one night, as the clock struck midnight, I was jolted awake by a soft, melodious singing that seemed to emanate from the very heart of the snowfield outside. At first, I dismissed it as the wind playing tricks on my ears, the shifting snow creating eerie sounds that mimicked voices. But the singing persisted, growing clearer with each passing night, as if someone or something was trying to communicate with me. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, a sorrowful tune that tugged at my soul. I lay in bed, listening intently, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and curiosity. The next morning, I tried to rationalize the experience, attributing it to the isolation and the long hours spent alone in the farmhouse. Yet, the singing continued, unwavering in its persistence, echoing through the silent mornings and long, cold nights. As days turned into weeks, the singing became a nightly ritual. Each evening, as dusk settled and the temperature plummeted, the melodious voice would rise from the snowfield, filling the farmhouse with its ethereal presence. I began to feel an inexplicable draw towards the source of the song, a magnetic pull that urged me to venture outside. Despite the biting cold and treacherous conditions, one particularly frigid night, fueled by a combination of sleeplessness and a desperate need for answers, I decided to follow the sound. Bundling up in layers of wool and fur, I grabbed a lantern and stepped out into the storm. The snow was falling heavily, each flake adding to the thick blanket that obscured my vision. The farmhouse stood silent behind me, the only sound the crunch of snow underfoot and the relentless howl of the wind. The singing was louder now, guiding me through the maze of snow-covered trees towards the heart of the snowfield. My breath formed visible puffs in the frigid air as I trudged forward, the lantern casting long, wavering shadows on the ground. The melody was both comforting and unnerving, a bittersweet lullaby that seemed to echo my deepest fears and unspoken desires. After what felt like hours, I reached a clearing where the snow had been disturbed, the ground compacted as if something or someone had moved through it recently. The singing stopped abruptly, leaving behind an oppressive silence that pressed in on me from all sides. I stood there, heart racing, trying to make sense of the sudden stillness. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows, a woman dressed in a flowing white gown, her hair cascading down her shoulders like strands of silver. Her eyes were hollow, filled with an eternal sadness that mirrored the sorrow in her song. She reached out a hand, her fingers trembling as she beckoned me closer. "Help me," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the howling wind. I felt a surge of compassion mixed with fear, unsure of how to respond. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice quivering. She remained silent, her gaze fixed on me with an intensity that made my blood run cold. I took a hesitant step forward, the snow crunching beneath my boots, and she began to fade, her form dissolving into the misty air like smoke. Desperate to keep her presence with me, I reached out, but my hand passed through her as if she were made of smoke. The cold seeped into my bones, and the snow around me began to swirl violently, the storm intensifying in response to our encounter. I turned to leave, but the path back seemed to have vanished, replaced by an endless expanse of white that stretched out before me. Panic set in as I realized I was lost, the storm closing in around me like a living entity. The singing began again, this time louder and more desperate, guiding me deeper into the snowfield. Each step felt heavier, the cold numbing my senses and my mind teetering on the edge of madness. Just as I felt myself succumbing to the storm's fury, the singing ceased once more, replaced by a profound silence that enveloped me. I collapsed onto the snow, the warmth of the farmhouse a distant memory as I struggled to stay conscious. In the fading light, I saw her again, the woman in white, standing at the edge of the clearing, her eyes meeting mine with a sorrow that transcended time. "Find peace," she whispered, her voice a haunting echo that resonated deep within me. With a final surge of determination, I pulled myself to my feet and began to make my way back to the farmhouse, following the faint outline of footprints that had materialized in the snow, footprints that led directly to the heart of the snowfield and vanished into the darkness beyond. When I finally stumbled back into the warmth of the farmhouse, the storm had subsided, leaving behind a serene but eerie stillness. I collapsed into bed, the memory of the night's events etched into my mind, the image of the woman in white and her haunting song forever lingering in my thoughts. The following morning, I ventured outside to inspect the clearing, but there was no sign of the woman or any footprints, just the untouched snow and the silent, frozen landscape. It was as if the entire encounter had been nothing more than a figment of my weary mind, a product of isolation and the relentless winter storm. Years later, the memory of that night still haunts me, a ghostly reminder of the thin veil between our world and the unknown. Some say the snowfield is cursed, a place where lost souls wander in eternal search of peace. Others believe it was a supernatural encounter, a manifestation of grief and longing that transcends the boundaries of life and death. If you ever find yourself alone in the heart of a winter storm, and you hear the haunting melody of a sorrowful song carried by the wind, remember my story. Sometimes, the echoes of the past reach out to us through the silence, guiding us toward truths we are not meant to uncover. Respect the mysteries that lie beneath the snow. Heed the whispers that call out in the night. And know that, in the frozen expanse of winter, the past never truly dies, it merely waits, hidden in the shadows, forever seeking the solace it can never find. Because in the stillness of the snow, beneath the veil of darkness, the whispers of lost souls linger, waiting for someone to listen, someone to remember. Story number 3. Eyes in the Forest. Winter in Michigan is a season of stark contrasts. The serene blanket of snow transforms the landscape into a silent, ethereal world, where every sound is muffled and the nights stretch endlessly under a canopy of stars. For my family and me, camping during this time was an annual tradition, a way to escape the hustle of city life and embrace the raw beauty of nature. Little did we know that our trip in January 2010 would lead us into a nightmare from which we might never fully awaken. We arrived at the secluded campsite nestled deep within the dense woods of the Upper Peninsula, a place where the trees stood tall and silent, their branches heavy with snow. The cabin we rented was quaint, offering just enough warmth and shelter against the biting cold. My wife, Laura, our teenage daughter, Emily, and I unloaded our gear, the crunch of snow underfoot breaking the stillness of the evening. As dusk settled, we gathered around the roaring fireplace, the flames casting dancing shadows on the walls. Laura prepared hot cocoa while Emily busied herself setting up her camera. Eager to capture the pristine winter scenery, I settled into the recliner, a book in hand, content with the peacefulness that enveloped us. Around 10 p.m., the temperature began to drop further, the wind picking up outside and howling through the gaps in the cabin walls. The first few nights had been uneventful, but that night, an unsettling feeling began to creep over me. It was subtle at first, a sense of being watched, a prickling on the back of my neck. I dismissed it as the isolation and the cold playing tricks on my mind. At midnight, the stillness was shattered by a series of sharp, rhythmic knocks coming from the front of the cabin. My heart raced as I exchanged worried glances with Laura and Emily. "Did you guys hear that?" I asked, my voice tinged with fear. Laura nodded, her eyes wide with concern. "It sounded like someone knocking on the door." Emily looked intrigued rather than scared. "Maybe it's just another camper or someone lost in the storm." I cautiously approached the window, pulling back the curtain to peer outside. The darkness was impenetrable, the heavy snowfall obscuring any view beyond a few feet. My flashlight beam cut through the night, revealing nothing but the swirling snow and the silhouette of the surrounding trees. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves, but as I turned to leave, something caught my eye, a pair of glowing red eyes staring back at me from the darkness. My breath caught in my throat as dozens of similar eyes blinked in unison, their luminescent gaze fixed directly on our cabin. I froze, unable to tear my eyes away from the eerie sight. "There's something out there," I whispered, my voice barely audible. Laura and Emily rushed over, their expressions mirroring my shock and fear. We watched in horror as the eyes remained fixed on us, seemingly observing our every move. The temperature inside the cabin plummeted, the warmth from the fireplace feeling distant and inadequate against the cold that now permeated every corner of the room. Without warning, the eyes vanished, swallowed by the relentless storm. The silence that followed was deafening, the oppressive stillness pressing down on us like a physical weight. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to process what we had just witnessed. "Should we call the police?" Emily suggested, her voice trembling. I shook my head, fearing that no one would find us in this remote location amidst the raging blizzard. "No, we need to stay calm. It might have been just some wild animals." Laura nodded, though I could see the fear lingering in her eyes. We decided to return to our activities, hoping to dispel the lingering unease. But as the night wore on, the sense of being watched never left us. Every creak of the cabin, every gust of wind outside seemed amplified, heightening our anxiety. The next morning, the storm had finally subsided, leaving behind a pristine blanket of snow that seemed to erase the night's horrors. Determined to find some explanation, we ventured outside to inspect the surroundings. The footprints we saw the previous night were nowhere to be found. No disturbed snow, no tracks leading away from the cabin. It was as if the eyes and the mysterious visitor had been nothing more than a figment of our terrified imaginations. Confused and unsettled, we returned to the cabin, the memory of those glowing eyes haunting our thoughts. Over breakfast, we discussed the incident, each of us grappling with our own fears and questions. Had we really seen those eyes, or had the isolation and the storm played tricks on us? Later that afternoon, we decided to explore the area further, hoping to uncover any signs of other campers or wildlife that might explain the night's events. As we hiked deeper into the forest, the quiet serenity of the woods felt different, more oppressive, almost foreboding. The trees loomed overhead, their branches heavy with snow, creating a labyrinth of shadows and light. Hours passed with no sign of anyone else, only the echoes of our footsteps crunching on the snow-covered ground. Just as we were about to head back, Emily called out, pointing to a clearing up ahead. In the center stood an old, abandoned cabin, its windows shattered and door hanging loosely on its hinges. It looked like it hadn't been inhabited for years, yet a faint trail of footprints led from the front door and disappeared into the surrounding woods. My blood ran cold as I realized the footprints matched the ones we had seen the night before. Small, delicate, and leading directly to this forsaken place. Laura and Emily exchanged worried glances, while I felt an overwhelming urge to turn back. But something held me in place, a force that compelled me to uncover the truth. We approached the abandoned cabin cautiously, the silence around us amplifying our fear. The door creaked as we pushed it open, revealing the interior a dusty, cluttered space frozen in time. The remnants of a forgotten life lay scattered across the floor, and in the center stood an old rocking chair, swaying gently despite the lack of any visible force. As we stepped inside, the air grew colder, the chill seeping into our bones. I approached the rocking chair, the memory of the red eyes fueling my determination. "There has to be an explanation," I muttered, my voice barely above a whisper. Suddenly, the room plunged into darkness as the storm outside intensified once more, the wind howling through the broken windows like the cries of lost souls. The candles we had brought flickered and died, leaving us in absolute blackness. My flashlight flickered, the beam cutting through the darkness only to reveal the same pair of glowing red eyes staring back at us from the doorway. "We need to leave," Laura insisted, grabbing my arm and pulling me toward the door. But the exit felt different now, the space closing in around us as if the cabin itself was trying to trap us inside. Emily screamed, a piercing sound that echoed through the room, and the figure of a woman dressed in white appeared before us, her face obscured by shadows, her eyes burning with an otherworldly intensity. "Why are you here?" I demanded, my voice cracking under the weight of fear. The apparition remained silent, her presence overwhelming and malevolent. I felt a surge of adrenaline as I reached for my phone, desperate to call for help. But it was dead, no signal, no battery, just an unyielding silence. The woman in white began to move toward us, her steps deliberate and haunting. "Leave this place," I shouted. But my words were lost in the roar of the storm and the oppressive silence that followed. Suddenly, everything snapped back to normal. The darkness lifted, the temperature rose, and the cabin returned to its abandoned state. The rocking chair stopped moving, and the red eyes were gone, replaced by an overwhelming sense of relief and exhaustion. We fled the cabin without looking back, the memory of those glowing eyes and the ghostly apparition etched into our minds. As we hiked back to our campsite, the footprints we had followed earlier had vanished, leaving no trace of their existence. That night, sleep eluded us as we sat around the fire, the eerie silence of the forest amplifying our fear. We packed up our gear at dawn, eager to leave the haunting memories behind us. As we drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us from the shadows of the forest, the echoes of that night lingering like a dark cloud over our hearts. Years later, I still think about that winter night in Michigan, the red eyes, the abandoned cabin, and the uninvited passenger who reached out to us from the depths of the storm. The experience left an indelible mark on me, a reminder of the thin veil between our world and the unknown. If you ever find yourself camping alone in the wilderness during a harsh winter, and you see a pair of glowing eyes staring back at you through the darkness, remember my story. Sometimes, the spirits that linger are not there to haunt but to seek recognition. Their presence a haunting testament to the tragedies that unfold beneath the silent, snowy nights. Respect the wilderness, heed the warnings whispered by the wind, and know that in the heart of the storm, the echoes of the past can reach out to claim the next unsuspecting traveler. Story number 4. The Uninvited Passenger. Winter in Tokyo can be deceptive. Beneath the neon glow and the bustling streets lies a tranquility that only the coldest months can bring. As a taxi driver, I've seen the city transform under layers of snow. The chaos softened into a serene, almost ethereal quiet. But on one particularly frigid night in December 2010, the serenity was shattered by an encounter that would haunt me for years to come. It was around 11:45 p.m. when my phone buzzed with a new fare request. The drop-off point was near Shinjuku Station, a place I frequented but rarely saw anything unusual. I accepted the ride, adjusting the rearview mirror and ensuring my heater was set to combat the biting cold outside. Tokyo's winter nights can be unforgiving, and staying warm was paramount for both me and my passengers. The rain had tapered off, leaving the streets slick and shimmering under the streetlights. I navigated through the familiar routes, the hum of the engine a comforting constant in the otherwise silent night. A few blocks later, I arrived at the pickup location, a quiet alleyway between towering office buildings, rarely visited at this hour. I rolled down the window, the crisp winter air rushing in. A woman stood alone, her figure clad in a flowing white robe that contrasted starkly against the dark, wet pavement. Her face was obscured by a thick scarf, hiding her features completely. There was an air of melancholy about her, an aura that made my skin crawl despite the warmth emanating from the cabin. "Good evening," I greeted, my voice steady despite the unease settling in my chest. "Where to?" She didn't respond verbally. Instead, she handed me a slip of paper with a scribbled address before slipping into the back seat. Her hands were cold, and a chill seemed to linger in the air as she closed the door behind her. I glanced at the paper. It was an address in the outskirts of Tokyo, a place I rarely drove to. As I pulled away, the woman remained silent, staring out the window into the darkness. I tried to engage her in conversation, but she gave nothing more than a slight nod, her eyes fixed on something beyond my line of sight. The ride was uneventful until we reached a desolate stretch of highway, far removed from the city's vibrant life. We arrived at the destination, a nondescript house surrounded by overgrown foliage and the remnants of what once might have been a garden. I parked the taxi, my hands gripping the steering wheel as I turned to assist her out. But when I glanced in the rearview mirror, my blood ran cold. Her seat was empty. The back door had not been opened, and there was no sign of her ever being there. Yet, a faint mist clung to the window, a remnant of her presence, as if her cold breath had lingered long after she vanished. I rubbed my eyes, certain that fatigue was playing tricks on me. Had I imagined her presence? The street was deserted, the only sound the distant howl of a stray dog and the whisper of the night wind. Confused and unnerved, I stepped out of the cab, the chill of the night biting at my skin. As I approached the house, a sinking feeling settled in my stomach. There was no sign of anyone else around, just the silent, empty yard blanketed in snow. I shook my head, trying to dispel the unease that had taken root. It wasn't until I reached the front door that I realized the gravity of the situation. On the window, smeared in what looked like a mix of rain and something darker, was a clear imprint of a handprint, her hand, pressed firmly against the glass. My heart pounded as I stood there, the image burning itself into my memory. How could her hand be on the window when there was no one inside? Determined to make sense of the inexplicable events, I returned to the cab and began searching for any sign of her. The back seat remained empty, the door locked just as I had left it. Desperate for answers, I reached for my phone to call her, but there was no signal, completely dead, as if the universe had decided to sever all connections between us. Panic threatened to overtake me as I recalled the stories I'd heard about spirits and apparitions haunting the lonely roads of Tokyo, but I dismissed them as urban legends. Nothing more than tales to scare late-night drivers. Shaken, I decided to seek out help. I drove back towards the city, my mind racing with questions. As I navigated the familiar streets, I couldn't shake the image of her handprint, the lingering chill that seemed to follow me even within the warmth of my taxi. The next morning, sleep eluded me. The memory of that night gnawed at my thoughts, the unanswered questions piling up like the snow outside. Determined to find some closure, I returned to the house, hoping to uncover any clues that might explain her sudden disappearance. Approaching the house once more, the scene was eerily quiet. The front door was ajar, swaying gently in the morning breeze. I stepped inside, the air thick with the scent of damp wood and cold. The interior was just as I had left it the night before, empty and silent, save for the faint imprint on the window. As I explored the house, I stumbled upon the kitchen, where the handprint was still visible on the window. My gaze then fell upon an old photograph lying on the countertop, half covered in snow. It was a family portrait, parents and a young girl, smiling brightly. The young girl in the photo looked strikingly similar to the woman in white. Her face obscured but her eyes filled with a haunting sadness. A chill ran down my spine as realization dawned on me. The woman I had picked up must have been that girl, someone who had perished in an accident near this very spot years ago. Her spirit, restless and sorrowful, had reached out to me, perhaps seeking recognition or help to move on from her tragic fate. Determined to help her find peace, I contacted the local authorities and explained what had happened. After some investigation, I learned that a young woman had indeed died in a car accident near that location in 2005. Her car had skidded off the icy road, crashing into a tree, and she had lost her life on impact. Her family had been devastated, and the site of the accident had since been a place of mourning and remembrance. Feeling a deep sense of responsibility, I decided to honor her memory. I returned to the house one last time, this time bringing with me candles and flowers. I arranged them carefully around the room, lighting the candles to dispel the lingering darkness. I spoke softly, recounting her story and expressing my hope that her spirit could finally find the peace it so desperately sought. As I finished, a gentle warmth filled the room, the air no longer cold and oppressive. I glanced at the window, expecting to see her once more, but she was gone, her presence replaced by a serene stillness that spoke of release and tranquility. In the days that followed, the house felt different, lighter, as if a heavy burden had been lifted. The handprint on the window had faded, leaving no trace of the night's haunting events. Sleep returned easily, and the eerie chill that had once gripped me dissipated, replaced by a comforting sense of closure. The experience left an indelible mark on me, a reminder of the thin veil that separates our world from the unknown. I shared my story with fellow drivers, many of whom dismissed it as a mere ghost story, but a few offered their own accounts of unexplained encounters on Tokyo's lonely roads. Years later, I still drive through Tokyo streets on winter nights, the memory of that encounter lingering like the remnants of a fading dream. The handprint on the window serves as a testament to the night I met an uninvited passenger, an apparition of sorrow seeking recognition and peace. If you ever find yourself driving alone on a cold winter night, and you see a figure in white your way, remember my story. Sometimes, the spirits that linger are not there to haunt but to reach out, to seek acknowledgement of their existence and a path to move forward. Respect their presence. Offer your compassion, and you may just help a restless soul find the peace they have long been denied. Because in the quiet of the night, beneath the veil of snow and silence, the echoes of the past can reach out to touch the present, reminding us all that some stories never truly end. They merely wait to be heard. Story number 5. Whispers in the Snow. Winter in Colorado is a time of both breathtaking beauty and unforgiving harshness. The towering pines and rugged mountains stand stoic against the relentless snowstorms, creating a landscape that is as mesmerizing as it is deadly. In January 2012, my friends and I embarked on a long-awaited hiking trip through the heart of the Rockies, seeking adventure and the solitude that only the wilderness can provide. Little did we know that our journey would lead us to a nightmarish encounter that would haunt us for years to come. Our group consisted of 5 close friends: Jake, the seasoned hiker; Emily, the ever-curious photographer; Tom, the practical one; Sarah, the storyteller; and me, Mike, the writer who found inspiration in the solitude of nature. We had meticulously planned our trip, ensuring we were well prepared for the unpredictable Colorado winters. Our destination was an old cabin, rumored to be abandoned but still standing strong against the elements. The first few days were filled with laughter, stunning vistas, and the camaraderie that comes from shared experiences in the wild. We set up camp each night, taking turns tending the fire and sharing stories under the blanket of stars. The cabin, nestled deep within the forest, provided the perfect refuge from the biting cold and howling winds outside. On the fourth day, as we trekked deeper into the wilderness, the weather began to change. Dark clouds rolled in, and the wind picked up, carrying with it the promise of a fierce snowstorm. Jake, ever the optimist, insisted we press on, believing the cabin was just a day's hike away. Reluctantly, the rest of us agreed, though a sense of unease settled over the group. By late afternoon, the sky had turned a menacing shade of gray, and the first heavy flakes of snow began to fall. Visibility dropped rapidly, reducing the once clear trail to an indistinct blur of white. We quickened our pace, hoping to reach the cabin before the storm fully unleashed its fury. As dusk approached, the storm intensified, and we decided it was best to find shelter. To our relief, the cabin stood before us, its silhouette barely visible through the blinding snow. We hurried inside, the warmth of the fire a welcome contrast to the freezing temperatures outside. The cabin was cramped but sturdy, with a single room that served as both living and sleeping quarters. That night, as the storm raged on, we huddled around the fire, the flickering flames casting eerie shadows on the walls. Emily was busy capturing the storm's fury through her lens, while Sarah entertained us with ghost stories of the Rockies. Jake and Tom were engrossed in conversation about survival techniques, and I sat quietly, jotting down notes for my next piece of writing. Around midnight, a strange feeling crept over me, a sense of being watched. I glanced up from my notebook, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. Shaking off the feeling, I returned to my writing, only to be interrupted by a sudden flicker of the lights. The room plunged into darkness before the old generator kicked in, restoring the dim glow. "Power's acting up," Jake remarked, trying to lighten the mood. Probably just the storm messing with the lines. But something was different. Emily, who had been focused on her camera, looked up with a puzzled expression. "Guys, I think there's something wrong with the lights." Before anyone could respond, a faint sound echoed through the cabin, a soft, rhythmic tapping that seemed to originate from the front door. We exchanged uneasy glances, the earlier sense of unease now tangible. "Probably just the wind," Tom suggested, but his voice lacked conviction. Curiosity got the better of me. "I'll check it out," I volunteered, grabbing a flashlight from the shelf. The others hesitated but eventually nodded, leaving me to investigate alone. I approached the front door cautiously, the sound of the storm muffled by the thick walls of the cabin. The tapping persisted, now louder and more deliberate, heart-pounding. I reached for the doorknob, but it felt unusually cold to the touch. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door slightly, peering out into the blinding snow. Nothing. The storm raged on, and the door remained closed. I closed it gently, convinced that it was just a trick of the wind or perhaps a loose shutter. As I turned to rejoin my friends, something caught my eye, a series of small, wet footprints leading from the door and disappearing into the snow-covered forest. I called out, "Guys, look at this." They gathered around, eyes wide with concern. "Do you think someone got lost in the storm?" Jake asked, his practical nature trying to rationalize the situation. "Maybe," Emily replied, but her unease was evident. "But why the tapping?" Determined to find out more, we decided to follow the footprints, hoping to locate the source and offer assistance. Bundling up in our warmest clothes, we ventured into the storm, the snow whipping around us like 1,000 tiny daggers. The footprints led us deeper into the forest, each step crunching loudly on the fresh snow. As we followed the trail, the storm showed no signs of abating. The wind howled through the trees, and visibility remained poor, making it difficult to navigate. The footprints became harder to follow as they faded into the distance, disappearing without a trace. "Maybe it just stopped," Sarah suggested, her voice wavering. "We should head back." But Jake was insistent. "No, someone might still be out there. We need to find them." Reluctantly, we pressed on, the storm intensifying around us. After what felt like hours, we reached a small clearing where the footprints abruptly stopped at an old, dilapidated cabin. The structure was barely standing, its windows shattered and door hanging loosely on its hinges. A faint, eerie glow emanated from within, contrasting sharply against the dark, snowy night. "That's strange," Tom muttered, peering into the window. "There's light inside, but no one should be here." We approached the cabin cautiously, the cold seeping into our bones despite our layers of clothing. The door creaked open on its own, revealing a dimly lit interior. The walls were covered in strange, grotesque drawings, symbols and figures that looked as though they had been scratched into the wood with clawed hands. Emily stepped forward, her camera at the ready. "This is creepy," she whispered, snapping photos of the eerie artwork. Jake pushed the door further open, and we stepped inside, the warmth from the interior washing over us like a false sense of security. The room was cluttered with old furniture, dust-covered and forgotten. In the center stood a single rocking chair, eerily swaying back and forth without any visible force. "Who's been here?" I demanded, my voice echoing through the empty space. No answer. As we explored the cabin, the strange drawings became more disturbing, depicting twisted figures and dark, foreboding landscapes. It was as if the walls were alive, telling a story of pain and sorrow through their chaotic designs. The atmosphere grew heavier, the oppressive silence broken only by the creaking of the rocking chair. Suddenly, the room plunged into darkness as the storm outside reached its peak. The door slammed shut, locking us inside. Panic set in as we fumbled for our flashlights, the beams cutting through the darkness to reveal the disturbing artwork once more. "Let's get out of here," Jake urged, his practicality faltering under the weight of fear. But as we turned to leave, the door wouldn't budge. The realization hit us hard. We were trapped. The temperature in the room dropped sharply, our breaths visible in the freezing air. The rocking chair began to move again, this time more violently, as if something was trying to communicate. Emily's camera light flickered and died, plunging us into total darkness. The room felt alive, the walls closing in as the symbols on the floor began to glow with an unearthly light. A low, mournful whisper filled the air, growing louder with each passing second. "Help us! Help us!" Terrified, we huddled together, unsure of what was happening. The whispers grew into cries, echoing around us like a chorus of lost souls. The drawings on the walls seemed to animate, moving and twisting in impossible ways, telling a story of tragedy and despair. In a desperate attempt to break free, I reached out to touch the door, but my hand passed through it as if it were made of smoke. The rocking chair stood motionless for a moment before slowly turning to face us, revealing the ghostly apparition of a woman dressed in white. Her eyes were hollow, filled with an eternal sadness that pierced through us. "Why are you here?" I managed to stammer, my voice barely a whisper. The apparition raised her hand, pointing toward the window. I followed her gaze, seeing the same ghostly figure of a woman standing outside, staring back at us with an intensity that made my blood run cold. The footprints on the snow were no longer small and childlike. They had transformed into large, deliberate marks leading away from the cabin and into the forest. "We need to find her," Jake said, his fear giving way to determination. "She might still be out there." Gathering our courage, we opened the door again, hoping to escape the torment within. But instead of finding a way out, we were met with the full force of the storm, the wind howling like the cries of the damned. The apparition of the woman in white stood at the threshold, her presence overwhelming and suffocating. "Stay with us," she pleaded, her voice a haunting echo that resonated deep within our souls. "We can't," I replied, my voice shaking. "We need to leave." But as we tried to step forward, the storm seemed to push us back, the snow swirling around us with a malevolent intent. The apparition reached out, her hand passing through mine, leaving a lingering chill that seeped into my very being. Suddenly, The room began to collapse, the walls crumbling and the floor giving way beneath us. We were falling, tumbling through the darkness, the cries of the storm blending with the haunting whispers of the cabin. Just as it seemed all was lost, we were thrust back into the night, the door slamming shut behind us with a final, resounding thud. Breathless and terrified, we stumbled out into the storm, the footprints leading us back to the cabin now obscured by the relentless snow. We didn't stop running until the cabin was nothing more than a distant silhouette against the white expanse. Exhausted and shaken, we made our way back to our campsite, the horrors of the night etched into our minds. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a tranquil but eerie silence. We packed up our gear in silence, the weight of our experience heavy on our hearts. As we prepared to leave, I glanced back toward the cabin, half expecting to see the apparition standing there. But there was nothing, no light, no movement, just the pristine snow covering the remnants of the old structure. "We're never coming back here," Emily whispered, her voice filled with a mix of relief and lingering fear. We hiked out of the wilderness with a newfound respect for the stories and legends that whispered through the Colorado forests. The cabin, with its grotesque drawings and haunted presence, remained a place of mystery and terror, a reminder that some places hold secrets that are better left undisturbed. Years later, the memory of that night still haunts me, the sight of a solitary cabin in the snow, the sound of haunting whispers, and the apparition of the woman in white are images that refuse to fade. Our experience serves as a chilling testament to the unseen forces that lurk in the wilderness, waiting for unsuspecting souls to uncover their dark stories. If you ever find yourself venturing into the remote stretches of Colorado during the dead of winter, remember our tale. Some cabins hold more than just the remnants of past lives. They hold the restless spirits of those who were never meant to be found. Respect the land, heed the warnings, and know that in the heart of the storm, the whispers of the lost can reach out to claim you, forever entwining your story with theirs. Because in the silence of the snow, beneath the blanket of white, the echoes of the past linger, waiting for someone to listen, someone to remember. Story number 6. The Hand on the Window. Winter in Vermont is a time of stark beauty and relentless cold. The snow blankets everything, transforming the landscape into a silent, white expanse where even the loudest sounds are muffled by the thick layers of ice and snow. For me, living alone in our secluded farmhouse had always been a dream come true, a sanctuary from the chaos of the outside world, where I could immerse myself in my writing and the serenity of nature. It was the first week of December 2015 when the storm hit. The weather forecast had warned of an impending blizzard, but I had underestimated its severity. By midnight, the winds were howling like wild beasts, and the snow was falling so heavily that visibility was reduced to mere feet. I was nestled in the living room, a thick blanket draped over my legs, deeply engrossed in a novel that had captured my imagination. The house creaked and groaned under the assault of the storm, each gust of wind rattling the windows and making the old wooden beams shudder. I tried to focus on my book, but a nagging sense of unease settled over me. There was an unnatural stillness to the night, a silence that seemed to press against the walls of the farmhouse, making the air thick with tension. Around 2 a.m., just as I was about to turn a particularly gripping page, I heard a faint, scraping sound emanating from the front of the house. My heart skipped a beat as I listened intently. It was unmistakably the sound of fingernails scratching against the icy window pane. I froze, my breath visible in the frigid air. As the sound grew louder, more deliberate, a chill ran down my spine. I glanced up from my book, my eyes scanning the room for the source of the noise. But everything seemed as it should except for the sound, which now echoed more intensely through the silent house. Gathering my courage, I set the book aside and approached the window, my footsteps muffled by the thick rug beneath my feet. As I reached the window, I held my breath, expecting to see someone out there, struggling against the storm. But there was no one in sight, only the swirling snow and the darkness beyond. Confused, I leaned closer, my eyes straining to pierce through the heavy snowfall. That's when I saw it. A ghostly hand pressed firmly against the glass, fingers clawing desperately at the cold surface. My heart pounded in my chest as I recoiled, stumbling back to the sofa. "Hello," I called out, my voice trembling. The hand remained, its grip unyielding, as if someone or something was trying to get inside. Fear and curiosity battled within me, each emotion tugging me in opposite directions, summoning all my bravery. I grabbed a flashlight and made my way to the front door. The storm outside was raging, the wind howling like a chorus of lost souls. I opened the door cautiously, the hinges creaking in protest. But there was no one there, no footprints in the fresh snow, no sign of anyone approaching. The door slammed shut behind me with a force that sent a shiver down my spine. I stood there, staring into the blinding white storm, my mind racing to make sense of what I had just witnessed. Had I imagined it? Was it a trick of the light or the result of my overactive imagination fueled by isolation and stress? I shook my head, trying to dispel the fear that clung to me like the snowflakes outside. Returning to the living room, I noticed something that sent a chill deeper into my bones. The handprint on the window was still there, clear and distinct. Despite the heavy snowfall, it looked wet, as if someone had pressed their hand against the glass moments before. But there was no sign of moisture on the surrounding snow. My pulse quickened as I realized that the handprint had been there all along, unnoticed until now. Determined to uncover the truth, I decided to investigate further. I wrapped myself in a thick coat and ventured outside, the cold biting at my skin despite the layers of clothing. The footprints leading away from the door were small and delicate, clearly made by a child, and they led straight into the dense forest beyond our property. But they abruptly stopped at the edge of the woods, as if the walker had vanished into thin air. I followed the trail, flashlight in hand, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and determination. The storm was still raging, the snow falling relentlessly, making it difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. The forest loomed around me, the trees swaying ominously in the wind, their branches heavy with snow. After what felt like hours, the footprints led me to a small clearing where an old, abandoned cabin stood. The structure was barely visible through the storm, its windows shattered and door hanging loosely on its hinges. I approached cautiously, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the darkness, revealing the remnants of a once cozy home now left to the elements. Inside, the cabin was cold and musty, filled with dust-covered furniture and remnants of a life long gone. I found an old rocking chair in the corner, its paint chipped and wood splintered. As I stepped closer, the temperature in the room seemed to drop, my breath visible in the frigid air. I reached out to touch the chair, but a sudden gust of wind slammed the door shut, plunging the cabin into darkness. Panicking, I fumbled for my flashlight, the beam flickering as I tried to illuminate the room. In the corner, I saw it, a shadowy figure standing silently, watching me with hollow eyes. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice cracking with fear. The figure remained silent, his presence oppressive and malevolent. I took a step back, my heart racing, but the figure began to move toward me, the shadows around it swirling and shifting unnaturally. "Leave me alone," I shouted, but my voice seemed to echo in the vast emptiness of the cabin. Just as the figure was about to reach me, the storm outside intensified, the wind howling louder than ever. The figure recoiled, fading into the darkness as the door slammed open once more, letting in a blinding flash of light that momentarily disoriented me. I didn't hesitate, running out of the cabin. I sprinted back through the storm, the footprints and the haunting figure etched into my mind. Breathless and shaken, I returned to the farmhouse, the handprint on the window still visible, now smeared with the blood-red ink of fear. I barricaded the doors and windows, not daring to open them again until morning. The rest of the night was a blur of sleepless terror, the whispers of the storm and the echoes of that haunting night keeping me on edge. The next morning, the storm had subsided, leaving behind a pristine blanket of snow that seemed to erase the horrors of the night before. Exhausted, I sat by the fireplace, staring at the handprint on the window, determined to find answers. I delved into the history of our farmhouse, uncovering a tragic story that sent chills down my spine. Years ago, in the same winter of 1998, a young girl named Lily had lived in our farmhouse with her family. One night, a similar storm had trapped them inside, and in a desperate attempt to seek help, Lily had pressed her small hand against the window, hoping someone would notice, but the storm was too fierce, and her family never made it out, leaving Lily's handprint as a silent witness to their tragedy. The realization hit me hard. Lily's spirit had been reaching out, trying to find someone to acknowledge her existence and help her find peace. The footprints and the apparition were her way of communicating, a desperate plea for help that had gone unanswered. Determined to honor her memory and help her spirit move on, I decided to perform a ritual of remembrance. I gathered candles, flowers, and a photo of Lily that I found among the remnants of the past owner's belongings. I lit the candles and placed the flowers around the fireplace, speaking softly into the silent room. "Lily," I whispered, "I know your story. I'm sorry you never got the help you needed. I'm here to help you find peace." As I spoke, the air in the cabin began to warm, the oppressive chill lifting as if the house itself was responding to my words. The shadowy figure reappeared, its presence now less menacing and more sorrowful. "Thank you," it whispered, a single tear tracing down its translucent face. The figure began to fade, the darkness dissipating into the light as Lily's spirit found the closure it had long sought. The handprint on the window seemed to glow softly before fading completely, leaving behind a sense of peace and finality. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, the lingering fear replaced by a profound sense of fulfillment. In the weeks that followed, the farmhouse felt lighter, the memories of that terrifying night becoming a part of our history rather than a haunting presence. Emily, our neighbor, and a local historian helped us preserve Lily's story, ensuring that her memory would never be forgotten. Years later, I still visit the farmhouse during the winter months, not out of fear but out of respect for the past. The handprint, once a symbol of terror, is now a testament to the enduring power of remembrance and the importance of acknowledging those who seek our help from beyond. If you ever find yourself alone in a remote place during a fierce winter storm, and you see a handprint pressed against your window or hear faint whispers in the night, remember my story. Sometimes, the spirits that reach out are not there to haunt but to seek understanding and peace. Honor their presence, listen to their stories, and you may just help a restless soul find the closure it so desperately needs. Because in the heart of the storm, beneath the veil of snow and silence, the echoes of the past can reach out, reminding us all that we are never truly alone. Story number 7. Whispers in the Blizzard. Winter in the Alaskan wilderness is both majestic and merciless. The landscape, draped in a thick blanket of snow, transforms into a silent, otherworldly expanse where every sound is amplified by the biting cold. In January 1998, my family and I found ourselves stranded in our remote cabin, miles away from the nearest town, as a relentless blizzard descended upon us. The storm raged for days, cutting off all communication and making the outside world seem like a distant, unreachable realm. Our cabin, a sturdy wooden structure with a roaring fireplace at its heart, had always been our refuge from the chaos of life. My wife, Laura, our teenage son, Ethan, and I had chosen this secluded spot for its tranquility and the promise of uninterrupted time together. Little did we know that this winter would test the very fabric of our sanity. It was the third night of the storm when the eerie occurrences began. The wind howled like a pack of wolves outside, and the snow piled higher with each passing hour. We huddled around the fireplace, trying to keep warm and pass the time with stories and board games. The isolation was suffocating, the silence only broken by the crackling of the fire and the occasional creak of the old house settling under the weight of the snow. Around midnight, as I was engrossed in a book, a faint sound pierced the silence, a soft, rhythmic tapping that seemed to come from outside the cabin. At first, I dismissed it as the wind playing tricks on my ears, but the sound persisted, growing slightly louder and more insistent. It was unmistakably the sound of someone or something knocking at our door. "Laura, Ethan, do you hear that?" I called out, my voice betraying a hint of unease. They nodded, their expressions mirroring my concern. The tapping continued, each knock more deliberate than the last. My heart pounded as I approached the front door, flashlight in hand. The storm had made it impossible to see anything beyond a few feet, but I was certain I heard footsteps crunching in the snow, leading directly to our doorstep. I reached for the doorknob, hesitating for a moment before unlocking it. The cold gust of wind slammed the door open, and the snow whipped inside, swirling around us in a frenzied dance. I swung the door shut, heart racing, but the tapping had stopped abruptly, replaced by an oppressive silence that filled the room. Shaken, I glanced down and noticed something that sent chills down my spine. Small, delicate footprints in the fresh snow leading from the door and disappearing into the dense forest behind us. There were no tracks leading away, no signs of anyone else nearby. It was as if whoever or whatever had approached our cabin had vanished into thin air. "Maybe it's a lost traveler," Laura suggested, her voice quivering slightly. "Someone caught in the storm." But the thought offered little comfort. We knew how treacherous the Alaskan winters could be, and the likelihood of encountering another soul in such isolation was slim. Determined to find answers, I grabbed my heavy coat and ventured outside, flashlight cutting through the swirling snow. The footprints led deeper into the forest, each step crunching loudly in the silence of the blizzard. As I followed the trail, the temperature seemed to drop further, the cold seeping into my bones despite my layers of clothing. The forest loomed around me, the trees standing like silent sentinels guarding ancient secrets. The footprints became harder to follow as the storm intensified, the snow obscuring the path and making the trail nearly invisible. Just as I was about to turn back, the footprints stopped abruptly at the edge of a frozen pond. The surface was smooth, untouched by any movement, reflecting the dim light of the moon struggling to break through the storm clouds. There was no sign of anyone or anything near the pond, just the eerie stillness that seemed to press in on me from all sides. Confused and unnerved, I decided to return to the cabin, but the storm had grown even more ferocious. Visibility was near zero, and the path back was obscured by a relentless barrage of snow. Panic began to set in as I realized how far I had ventured into the wilderness, the storm making it impossible to find my way back. I hurried through the blinding snow, my breaths visible in the frigid air, until finally, I made it back to the warmth of our cabin. Laura and Ethan were waiting, their faces pale with fear. "What did you find?" Ethan asked, his eyes wide with anxiety. "No one," I replied, shaking my head. "Just these footprints leading into the forest and then nothing." Laura approached, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. "Maybe it's best if we stay here and wait for the storm to pass. We don't know what or who that was." We spent the rest of the night huddled together, the events of earlier weighing heavily on our minds. The silence was broken only by the occasional gust of wind and the distant roar of the storm. As dawn broke, the storm finally began to subside, leaving behind a landscape transformed by the relentless snow. The next day, as we began to assess the damage and start clearing the snow, we decided to search for any additional clues. The footprints had vanished, leaving no trace of their existence, but the sense of unease lingered like a shadow over our hearts. We couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us, something that had been let out from the depths of the storm. Determined to find answers, I contacted the local authorities to report the mysterious footprints. A search party was organized, but despite their efforts, no one was ever found in the forest that night. The story quickly became a local legend, with many attributing the event to spirits of the lost or the harshness of nature itself. Months passed, and the memory of that night began to fade, replaced by the routine of daily life. But the haunting experience left an indelible mark on me, a reminder of the thin veil between our world and the unknown. I often found myself staring out the window during winter storms, half expecting to see those faint footprints reappear or hear the soft tapping once more. One particularly cold night, years later, as I sat alone in the cabin reflecting on that fateful winter, I heard it, the same faint, rhythmic tapping echoing through the silence. My heart raced as I listened, the memories flooding back with a clarity that was both terrifying and mesmerizing. "Someone's here," I whispered to myself, the fear returning in full force. I approached the door cautiously, flashlight in hand, my mind torn between fear and the desperate need for answers. As I reached for the doorknob, the tapping ceased abruptly, replaced by an overwhelming sense of sorrow and longing. I opened the door slowly, the snow swirling violently in the gust of wind that accompanied the opening. There was no one there, only the empty expanse of the forest stretching out before me. Yet, the feeling of being watched was palpable, a heavy presence that pressed in on me from all sides. Turning away, I retreated to the safety of the cabin, the door shutting firmly behind me. As I sank back into the sofa, the memories of that winter night consumed me, the unanswered questions and lingering fear resurfacing with a vengeance. In that moment, I realized that some mysteries are never truly solved, their echoes reverberating through time and space, forever haunting those who dare to seek the truth. The footprints, the faint calls, the haunting presence, they were all reminders that the wilderness holds secrets far beyond our understanding, secrets that continue to whisper in the dead of winter, waiting for someone to listen. If you ever find yourself alone in the heart of a snowstorm, and you hear faint calls echoing through the night, remember my story. Sometimes, the voices of the lost linger in the silence, their footsteps etched into the snow, forever searching for a way back home. Respect the wilderness, heed its warnings, and know that in the depths of the storm, the past never truly dies, it merely waits, hidden beneath the relentless blizzard, ready to whisper its secrets to those who listen.